Stop scrolling and check your old pennies, because this 1924 wheat penny could be hiding a story worth thousands of dollars. This coin has a mint mark and unusual brown spots on both sides, but the real mystery is what those details could mean. Before you spend or clean an old wheat penny, take a closer look, because this tiny coin may be far more interesting than it looks. Coin 1. 1944 wheat penny. The darkened penny from a world at war. Picture it. 1944 World War II is still raging across Europe and the Pacific. American soldiers are fighting overseas. Factories are working around the clock. And back home, ordinary people are carefully spending every cent they have. In the middle of this historic moment, the Philadelphia Mint is striking millions of Lincoln Wheat Pennies, small copper coins that seem completely ordinary at the time. But nearly a century later, one of these pennies can suddenly become a fascinating piece of American history. Look closely at this 1944 wheat penny. It has no mint mark, meaning it was struck at the Philadelphia Mint. And across its surface, you can see a dark, almost black layer that gives the coin an unmistakably old appearance. At first glance, someone might think the dark surface means the coin is damaged or worthless. But don't be so quick to judge it. Copper naturally changes color as it spends decades exposed to air, moisture, storage conditions, and its surroundings. Over time, a bright copper surface can become brown, darker, or develop different shades of toning. And that's one reason old pennies can look completely different from the day they left the mint. Now think about the year printed on this coin. 1944 America was not thinking about preserving pennies for future collectors. This was a country focused on winning a global war. A coin like this could have been carried inside a soldier's pocket, passed across a grocery store counter, dropped into a cash register, or placed inside a child's small collection. Nobody knew that decades later, someone would hold the same penny under a light and wonder where it had been. The 1944 Lincoln Wheat Penny carries one of the most recognizable designs in American coin history. On the front, Abraham Lincoln faces right, with liberty beside him, and in God we trust above. The date, 1944, appears to the right of Lincoln. Turn the coin over, and you find the famous wheat stalks surrounding 1 cent and United States of America. These wheat ears are the reason collectors call it a wheat penny, a design that remained on the Lincoln cent until 1958. But 1944 was a particularly interesting year for American cents, because the mint had just moved away from the unusual steel cents used during 1943. Copper was needed for the war effort, so the 1943 steel cent was created as a temporary solution. Then, in 1944, the mint returned to a copper-based composition for regular cents. That means this little penny was produced during a fascinating period when even the metal inside American coins was connected to the demands of war. Now look again at the missing mint mark. There is no letter beneath the date. That is normal for a Philadelphia coin, but it is still an important detail to check. Collectors always want to know where a coin was produced, and the mint mark can sometimes help separate one issue from another. But there is something else you should understand. A 1944 wheat penny without a mint mark is not automatically an extremely rare coin. Philadelphia produced a very large number of 1944 cents, so the date and absence of a mint mark alone do not create an $18,000 coin. The real story is in the individual coin, its exact condition, surface preservation, color, strike, possible varieties or errors, and whether its authenticity and grade can be professionally verified. And that's where the dark layer becomes interesting. If the surface is simply natural aging or toning, it may tell us something about how the coin was stored for decades. But if the surface has been chemically altered, corroded, or artificially treated, that can be a completely different situation. This is why collectors should never judge an old penny simply by its color. They study the entire coin. They inspect Lincoln's portrait, the date, the lettering, the wheat stalks, the rim, and the surface. They compare it with known examples. And when the potential value is high, professional authentication becomes extremely important. For the particular example we're discussing, the claimed current market value is around $18,000. Still, imagine what this little penny has survived. More than 80 years have passed since it was struck. The Second World War ended. Generations came and went. America changed dramatically. Cash registers changed. Shopping changed. Technology changed. And yet, this tiny copper coin survived all of it. That's what makes old coins so powerful. You're not simply looking at a piece of metal. You're looking at an object that once belonged to another America. A coin that may have been completely forgotten for decades can suddenly become the center of a collector's attention. So if you ever find a 1944 wheat penny with no mint mark and a dark, aged surface, don't immediately spend it and don't rush to clean it. Take a closer look. Check the date. Examine both sides. Study the surface. Look for unusual details. And if the coin appears potentially valuable, have it properly examined before making any assumptions. Because sometimes the most ordinary-looking penny can carry the most fascinating story. A coin struck during World War II passed through everyday American life, forgotten for decades, and finally discovered again. The 1944 wheat penny may be small enough to fit between your fingers, but the history behind it is anything but small. And that is exactly why one simple penny can make a collector stop, look twice, and wonder what other secrets might still be hiding in an old jar of coins. Coin 2, 1924 wheat penny, the century-old coin, with a mysterious green surface. Picture it. 1924, America is entering the roaring 20s, a decade of rapid change, growing cities, new technology, and a completely different way of life. In the middle of this changing America, the Philadelphia Mint was producing Lincoln Wheat Pennies that would quietly enter everyday circulation. One of those coins was a simple 1-cent piece, dated 1924. Nobody handling it at the time could have imagined that nearly a century later, collectors would be examining its tiny details and wondering about its history. Now look closely at this 1924 wheat penny. There is no mint mark beneath the date, and that small detail tells us where this coin was born, Philadelphia. For a coin collector, the absence of a mint mark can be just as important as the presence of one, because it helps identify the mint where the coin was produced. But the most unusual feature on this particular example appears on the reverse side. Look carefully, and you can see small light green dots scattered across the surface. At first glance, those spots may make the coin look strange, old, or even damaged. But with a coin this old, unusual surface coloring needs to be examined carefully. Copper can change dramatically over many decades, depending on how the coin was stored and what conditions it experienced. Exposure to moisture, air, chemicals, or other materials can cause different colors and surface reactions to develop. And that's why collectors should never assume that green spots automatically mean a coin is rare. Sometimes they can be natural-looking toning, while in other cases, they can indicate corrosion or environmental damage. The exact cause matters. This 1924 wheat penny carries the famous Lincoln design that Americans had already been using for more than a decade. On the obverse, Abraham Lincoln faces right, with liberty beside him, and in God we trust above. The date, 1924, appears to the right of Lincoln. Turn the coin over, and you see the two wheat stalks surrounding 1 cent and United States of America. Above them is the familiar phrase, E pluribus unum. This wheat design would remain on the Lincoln cent until 1958, making these coins one of the most recognizable pieces of American coinage. But in 1924, this penny was not considered a historic treasure. It was simply money. It could have been used to buy a small item at a store, handed to a child, dropped into a cash register, or carried inside someone's pocket. It may have passed through dozens of hands before disappearing into a drawer or collection. And then the decades began to pass. The people who first used this coin grew old. The stores changed. The streets changed. America changed. But the penny survived. That is the incredible part of old coin collecting. A tiny object can survive long after the world around it has completely changed. Now take another look at the condition. The coin has an old appearance, and the unusual green dots on the reverse immediately attract attention. But collectors know that appearance alone does not determine value. A coin's date, mint, grade, surfaces, strike, varieties, errors, and authenticity all have to be considered together. The 1924 Philadelphia wheat penny was produced in significant numbers, so simply having no mint mark does not automatically make it an extremely rare coin. What makes an individual example interesting is everything else that can be discovered about it. Is the surface original? Are the green spots part of natural toning or environmental exposure? Has the coin ever been cleaned or chemically treated? Are there unusual dye characteristics or genuine mint errors? These are the questions that can separate an ordinary old penny from a truly collectible example. And there is one rule every collector should remember: don't clean it. If you find an old penny with dark areas, green spots, or unusual discoloration, the temptation to polish it can be strong. But cleaning can permanently change the surface and may reduce the coin's collector appeal. Sometimes the strange-looking surface is actually evidence of the coin's long journey, and removing it can destroy information that a specialist might want to examine. For the particular example we're discussing, the claimed current market value is around $85,000. Any rare variety or error, and ideally professional certification or documented sales history. Still, imagine finding this coin in an old collection. You turn it over and notice those tiny green dots. You look at the date and realize you're holding a penny from 1924. Suddenly, the coin doesn't feel ordinary anymore. You're holding something that has survived roughly 100 years of American history. It existed before television became common, before modern computers, before smartphones, and before most of the technology that surrounds us today. It could have been sitting quietly in a box while the entire world changed around it. That's why collectors love wheat pennies. They are small enough to overlook, but old enough to connect us directly to another era. So if you ever find a 1924 wheat penny without a mint mark, don't simply throw it into a pile with ordinary coins. Take a closer look at both sides. Study the date, the lettering, the wheat stalks, and especially any unusual surface marks. And if you see green spots, don't immediately assume you've discovered a rare fortune. Have the coin properly examined before making any big decision. Because sometimes the most interesting part of an old coin isn't the number printed on the date or the color on the surface. It's the mystery of how that little piece of metal managed to survive for nearly a century and end up in your hands. A 1924 wheat penny may have started as one ordinary cent, but after 100 years, it has become something much more fascinating. A tiny survivor from another America, carrying a story that was waiting all along for someone to notice. Coin 3, 1936, Wheat Penny. The ordinary penny that survived 90 years. Picture it. 1936, America was slowly finding its way through the Great Depression. Jobs were scarce, families were careful with every cent, and a single penny could still matter in everyday life. In Philadelphia, the United States Mint was producing millions of Lincoln Wheat Pennies, coins that looked completely ordinary at the time, but would eventually become pieces of American history. Now look closely at this one, a 1936 wheat penny with no mint mark and an almost fine condition. That missing mint mark tells us something important. This coin was struck at the Philadelphia Mint, where coins were produced without a mint letter. At first glance, there may be nothing dramatic about it. No obvious error, no unusual design, nothing screaming for attention. But that's exactly what makes old coins so fascinating. Sometimes the coins that look the most ordinary are the ones that make collectors stop and look twice. The Lincoln Wheat Penny had already been part of American life for more than 25 years. By 1936, on the front, Abraham Lincoln faces right, surrounded by the words, "Liberty and in God we trust," with the date 1936 beside him. Turn the coin over, and you see the famous wheat stalks framing 1 cent and United States of America. This design was familiar to millions of Americans, and nobody using this penny in 1936 could have imagined that it would still be examined nearly a century later. Think about the journey this tiny coin could have taken. It may have been handed over at a grocery store, carried inside a worker's pocket, dropped on a street, placed into a child's collection, or forgotten inside an old drawer. Every time it changed hands, another small chapter was added to its story. And then there is the condition. Almost fine means the coin has clearly experienced circulation, but important details remain visible. The highest points of the design show wear, while enough of Lincoln's portrait and the reverse lettering can still survive for the coin's identity and history to remain clear. For collectors, that wear isn't simply damage. It is evidence of this coin's life. A coin that has survived decades of circulation has something a brand new coin never had, a documented connection to ordinary American life of another era. But here's where you need to be careful. A 1936 wheat penny without a mint mark is not automatically a $54,000 coin. Philadelphia cents from this year were produced in large numbers, so the date and missing mint mark alone do not create extreme rarity. The real question is what makes a particular example different. Condition, strike quality, original surfaces, varieties, errors, and professional authentication can all have a major impact on value. That's why serious collectors don't judge an old penny from one detail alone. They examine the entire coin. They look at the date, the lettering, Lincoln's portrait, the wheat stalks, the surface, and the overall preservation. They also compare the coin with known examples and, when necessary, have it professionally graded. For the particular example we're discussing, the claimed current market value is around $54,000. And that's what makes the hunt so exciting. Imagine finding an old wheat penny in a box of forgotten coins and realizing that the date goes all the way back to 1936. You turn it over. No mint mark. You look at the condition. Almost fine. Then you start wondering how long it has been sitting there and what hands it passed through before reaching you. More than 90 years can separate you from the person who first spent this coin. The world that person knew was completely different. There were no smartphones, no internet, no modern digital payments, and no idea that someone decades later would be studying the tiny details of this penny under a bright light. And yet the coin survived. That's the real power of coin collecting. You're not simply collecting metal. You're collecting moments that refused to disappear. A 1936 wheat penny may look small and ordinary, but it carries the history of an America that has completely changed. So if you ever find a 1936 wheat penny without a mint mark, don't throw it back into the pile without looking carefully. Check the date, examine the condition, inspect both sides, and never clean an old coin just because it looks dirty or worn. Sometimes the surface you're tempted to remove is part of the coin's history. And sometimes the most overlooked penny in an old collection is the one that makes you stop and ask the question every collector loves to ask. Could this little coin be worth far more than 1 cent? Coin 4, 1957 wheat penny, the last chapter of an American classic. Picture it. 1957 America is entering a new era. The post-war years have transformed the country. Families are moving into a modern age. New technology is appearing everywhere, and the old Lincoln Wheat Penny is approaching the final years of its historic run. In the middle of this changing America, the United States Mint is still producing millions of these familiar 1-cent coins. And then there is this 1957 wheat penny. Look closely, and you'll notice the mint mark beneath the date, a small detail that tells you where this particular coin was born. By 1957, the wheat penny had already been part of American life for almost 50 years. Millions of Americans had handled these coins without ever imagining that the design would soon disappear. And that is what makes this particular year so interesting. The Lincoln Wheat Penny would continue for only one more year before the reverse design changed in 1959. That means a 1957 penny belongs to the final chapter of one of the longest-running designs in American coin history. Now look at the coin from both sides. You can see brown spots across the surfaces, giving it an aged appearance that immediately catches the eye. But those brown areas need to be understood carefully. Copper naturally changes color over time, and old pennies can develop brown coloration or different shades because of storage and environmental exposure. However, not every brown spot is automatically valuable toning. Some surface marks can come from dirt, corrosion, or environmental reactions. That's why collectors examine the entire coin rather than judging it by color alone. The front of this penny carries the familiar portrait of Abraham Lincoln, with liberty beside him, "In God we trust" above, and the date 1957 to the right. Turn it over, and the famous wheat stalks appear on both sides of 1 cent and United States of America. Above them is E pluribus unum. This was a design Americans had seen for generations, but by 1957, its time was almost over. Imagine someone spending this penny in 1957. They probably weren't thinking about history. They weren't thinking about collectors. They were simply using 1 cent to complete an everyday purchase. The coin might have passed through a grocery store, a gas station, a vending machine, or a child's pocket. It may have been saved in a jar, forgotten in a drawer, or carried for years before eventually being put aside. And then the decades passed. America changed. New coins appeared. The wheat reverse disappeared. But this little penny survived. That is where the collector's story begins. A 1957 wheat penny with a mint mark can be identified by that small letter beneath the date. But the mint mark alone does not automatically make the coin extremely rare. Collectors also examine its grade, strike, color, surface preservation, varieties, and possible errors. The brown spots on this example make the surface especially important to inspect. If you're holding an old copper coin like this, don't polish it and don't try to scrub the spots away. Cleaning can permanently alter the original surface and may reduce collector appeal. Sometimes an old coin's natural appearance is part of its history. Now here's the number associated with the particular example we're discussing. Its claimed current market value is around $29,000. And whether the coin contains a documented rare variety or mint error. And that's an important lesson for anyone searching through old coins. Don't judge a penny only by its age. Don't judge it only by its color. And don't assume that every old coin with a mint mark is automatically rare. The real clues are hidden in the details. Look at the date. Check the mint mark. Examine Lincoln's portrait. Study the lettering. Turn the coin over and inspect the wheat stalks. Look carefully at both surfaces for unusual characteristics. Then compare what you find with reliable references or have the coin professionally examined if it appears exceptional. But there is something even more fascinating about this 1957 penny. It represents one of the final moments of the wheat penny era. Just 2 years later, the familiar wheat stalks would disappear and the reverse would receive a completely different design. So when you hold a 1957 wheat penny, you're holding one of the final pieces of a design that had been part of American life since 1909. More than 50 years of history were coming to an end. Millions of these pennies were still being used, but the era was already approaching its final chapter. That's why this coin deserves a second look. The brown spots may make it appear old and ordinary, but beneath that surface is a connection to a time when America was rapidly transforming. A time before today's technology, before digital payments, before coins became something people rarely carried in their pockets. This penny was made to be spent, but instead it survived. It crossed decades and generations and eventually became something much more meaningful than its original 1-cent purpose. So if you ever find a 1957 wheat penny with a mint mark and unusual brown spots on both sides, don't immediately dismiss it. Don't clean it. Don't assume the spots make it worthless. Examine it carefully and look for the details that could tell you exactly what you're holding. Because sometimes a coin doesn't need to look perfect to be fascinating. Sometimes its age, its history, and the mystery hidden in its surfaces are enough to make you stop and look twice. And this 1957 wheat penny may be one of those coins, a small copper survivor from the final years of an American classic, carrying nearly 70 years of history in the palm of your hand.